You're listening to Skippycast. I'm David McFee. Skippycast is a podcast about hobo-like travel. Thanks for downloading this episode 6. We're going to take a ride on the Dirty Dog, or as it's better known, the Greyhound coach. That slick silver blue icon of the American highways and byways. At least that's the way I like to think about it. Before I got to the States, I was well used to hopping on a bus, either to cross town or for several hours across country. Public transport didn't hold any stigma for me. It was just an economical and somewhat leisurely way to get from A to B. So when I needed a ride from Auburn, Alabama to school in Columbia, Missouri, I didn't see it as a problem to plonk down $44, at least that's what I think it cost, for a ticket to ride. My ex-wife, however, was not so confident. Her conservative mother equally so. They just couldn't wrap their heads around why I would want to do that. I remember hopping onto that bus one sunny August afternoon with nothing but a sense of adventure. And an adventure it was. I mean, I can laugh now, and I still have a deep love and affection for coaches and Greyhound in general, but that trip was some form of unholy hell, to the point where the memory of it feels as fresh today as it was in 1999. The details just seem to stick. The almost 3-hour delay after getting bumped from a bus in Birmingham, Alabama, the compensation of a meal allowance sufficient to cover a burger and fries from the station cafeteria, sharing a cigarette on the empty streets with a homeless guy. My first introduction to poverty in Black America and the big but empty cities of the South. The rolling road through small towns that seemed straight out of a Steinbeck novel. Seeing my first Amish in St. Louis, Missouri. The lack of comfort, the smells, including being witness to someone using the onboard toilet that involved shrieks and laughter at around 2 in the morning. The sheer joy of it all coming to an end over 20 hours later and swearing never again, at least until the memory faded and I did it again a few months later. Greyhound was awful, but amazing at the same time. The people were incredible, and remember, this was some of my first interactions in the US. And that leads me to the interviewee Bobby Abrahamson. While looking for a good article on Greyhound, I found a 2013 Vice story titled Ridin the Dirty Dog, and the main picture grabbed me. It was the side of a Greyhound bus at night and a man sleeping, and it brought back all of those memories. That picture was taken by Bobby Abrahamson for his 2001 road trip across the US by Greyhound for his book One Summer Across America. That was my Greyhound. That was my time. And I read on and it was great. And I'll leave the link in the show notes because the article's still out there. But as funny as it wasn't Bobby's story. The story was by Aaron Lake Smith. The pictures had been paired with it because he had travelled around at the same time, also using an Ameripass. Now, I won't spoil it for you, but it was gritty and interesting. It has a rebellious streak where he fakes an Ameripass using Kinko's, reminding me of all those scams in my youth, like counterfeit subway tokens or angling your Smart Rider bus pass so it mispunches and you get a free ride on Transperth. Now, that last reference was very specific to Western Australia in the early 1980s. So when I first emailed Bobby in 2018, I thought I was speaking to the author, but of course I wasn't. And that's when I researched his book. And that's when I realized that Bobby was the person that I wanted to speak to. His book is amazing, and it really captures the time and place. Now, this is a 2-part episode, and it had to be because it's long. But I hope it's worth it. It certainly was to me. Thank you, Bobby, for joining me. I appreciate you coming on my show. It has been some time since I first started to talk to you, and now finally we've got it together.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to share my story with you and your listeners. So thanks for inviting me.
Well, let's just say listener for now. We're building. We're
Okay.
building. Now,
Yeah.
I came across you because I actually came across an article called Ridin the Dirty Dog. Now, that article is not about you.
No.
You don't represent any similarity to the person in that article whatsoever, right? Because he was, I think he used a fake pass and everything else, but he did use your photos.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it wasn't. I mean, I think Vice contacted me. I don't remember if it was the writer or Vice themselves. Somehow somebody knew about my book and they knew that it would be good illustration for the story. I think the two things happened completely separate is accurate. You know, what he wrote and why he wrote it it didn't have to do with my photography, and my photography didn't have to do with his article. But there are definitely crossovers there.
Well, it provides the accent, I
Yeah,
think.
and I mean, I think the fascination with the people and the stories of the people on the bus is something that we both, I think, was what was driving him, and I think it was a he that wrote that story.
It was.
I think that was what was driving him, and certainly what was driving me was an opportunity to meet and photograph people on the bus. So
So what actually is your background? Because, like I say, I was a bit confused about who exactly I was reaching out to at first, but I'm glad that I got to you because I really did enjoy your book. But so, what is your background? I mean, who is Bobby Abrahamson?
Abramson.
Abramson. Okay, I will. That's probably accent as much as
No,
anything.
no, no. It looks like it's spelled that. I usually spell it out that way to people when I tell them what it is, but it's yeah, it's got a silent.
Say it for me one more time so I can remember.
Just drop the ham. I like to say it's a silent kosher ham. So A- Abramson,
Abramson.
yeah, exactly,
Got it.
Abramson. Anyway, my background is I studied. I got a history degree from the University of Georgia. I grew up in Atlanta, and I got a history degree, and so it was very much liberal arts and a lot of literature and history, and I was very captivated, especially with 20th century history, and I wrote my I wrote sort of my senior history thesis research project on the hippie movement in America, which was sort of preceded and came about from, according to a lot of scholars, from the counterculture and the beatnik movement that preceded that. And we can circle back around to Kerouac and Ginsburg and all of them. But then I took a photojournalism class my last quarter in college, not really knowing what I was going to do with my for work afterwards. I was working as a breakfast cook at a restaurant in Athens, Georgia, where I was going to school, and I took this photojournalism class, and that sort of catapulted me into photography. And then I built my portfolio and started as a stringer or freelancer in Athens at the school paper, making like $5 a picture, something like that. And eventually, over the next decade and a half, by the late 90s, I graduated in 88. By the late 90s, I was freelancing for the New York Times, doing some assignments for Time Magazine, Fortune, a lot for the Atlanta Journal Constitution. So I was shooting news, photojournalism. So
Hmm.
always was interested in documenting the real. I'm not a photographer who stages things or does fashion or landscape as much. I'll do a landscape if it has to do with people. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
I want there to be a figure in the landscape or something relatable to a story about people. So
But did you always have an interest in photography? I mean, obviously, with history, you always had that, well, Americana and things like that. But did you always have an interest in photography?
I wouldn't say so. No, actually. I mean, my first backpacking trip, my first sort of vagabonding, which I know is kind of like the theme of your podcast, right? Is that is vagabonding a right way to put it, or
I say hobo, but I mean, hobo is actually a migrant worker. So I'm going to have to play with that a little bit. Yeah, I think
okay?
vagabonding is probably closer to the truth.
So I think that yeah, I my first backpacking trip, I actually didn't. I brought a camera and I shot like one roll. So and that was 87, and then 88 I took the photojournalism class. So I don't think I had taken a photography class when I was like 10 or 11 and done darkroom, but I really hadn't done anything with it until I took that photography class my last quarter. So I was kind of a late bloomer. I mean, I know a lot of photographers that started in elementary school or high school and did the yearbook and stuff like that, but
Hmm.
it was more like it just clicked. I realized that I was more of a visual person than like a written person, and I always struggled with writing the papers that I had to write in history, and like photography was just just go and photograph it, and there you go, you got it, and I wanted to witness history. That's why I wanted to be a
Hmm.
photojournalist, so I could make the images. I was captivated by the images from World War II, Vietnam War, even all the way back to the Civil War, Crimean War, you know, child labor in the 30s and 20s in America, all that stuff. I had seen it all in the history books, and I realized it was, documentary photographers that were out there doing that stuff.
A picture worth a thousand words, and so on.
Yeah, and also, I mean, it's true that even in the written word, that there's no absolute sort of truth, that it's subjective based on the writer and the perceptions and attitudes of the writer and the people that are quoted. But photography, what's also beautiful about it is if you don't say too much about what the picture is about, then the viewer can interpret it in many ways, and that's really cool that everybody gets to write their own kind of take on the story, you know what I mean? And I like that idea about photography, that it can be subjective, and that's kind of why I moved away from being a photojournalist and kept doing these documentary projects, because with the photojournalism, the editors were always telling me what the picture was supposed to be of and look like, and even sometimes which way the person should face on the page, and you
Hmm.
know all that. And with my own documentary work, it was like a chance to weave a visual narrative with multiple pictures, and I always had this aspiration to do a book, and that would be pictures primarily.
Hmm.
And the One Summer Across America book that I did from Riding the Greyhound, which you have a copy, right?
I do. I got a copy not long after I read the
Yeah.
article.
It's You'll notice if you see the book that there's just pictures. There's not even captions on the opposing pages or whatever. So you have to get to the back. It was really trying to create just a visual narrative, in not just one picture worth a thousand words, but actually, an extended series of pictures that create a feeling of a journey and a voyage through a look at a particular subject matter.
Well, there was a bit of nostalgia for me because I have ridden the dog or the dirty dog,
Yeah.
depending on how much you love it. How did you get to One Summer Across America? What was your inspiration? Now you mentioned Jack Kerouac at the beginning of the book, so obviously you're interested in on the road and that type of road
Right.
journey. So how did you get to One Summer Across America?
Well, I'm gonna try and keep everything concise, because I could talk about any one of these questions for 45 minutes.
Indeed.
Well, you may or may not know of the photographer Robert Frank, but Robert Frank did a book called The Americans that came out in 1958 or 9, and he met Jack Kerouac, and Jack Kerouac wrote the introduction. And The Americans by Robert Frank is considered by many as sort of the equivalent in photography to On the Road,
Hmm.
and that's why he actually went with when he met Kerouac, because it's a very soulful, poetic, lonely, critical look at kind of America at a time that was very Leave It to Beaver, just like the Beatniks were sort of poking a finger in the eye of kind of mainstream bourgeois middle class America, and saying there's something wrong here. This is not something that we really want to buy into. It doesn't make sense to us. There's something deeper that should be going on, or that we have a deeper connection that people want. So anyway, Robert Frank's The Americans, which has an introduction by Jack Kerouac, is really the genesis, the motivation, and I would say my book One Summer Across America is an homage to Robert Frank, and there's actually a letter from Robert Frank in the back of the book that serves as an afterword. So
Hmm.
to actually create this whole body of work and then send it to Robert Frank, asking him if he would write something for me to include in the book, and that was kind of a long process by itself. But you'd have to see the Americans to understand that. But it's definitely the same idea of sort of looking critically, wandering America alone, anonymous, and observing and making your own connections. That kind of freedom of the open road, you feel it definitely in the Americans, and certainly I read and reread On the Road and Dharma Bums
Mm.
and several other of Kerouac's books, and Ginsberg's poetry, and Gary Snyder's poetry as well. All the beatniks, really. Yeah.
But it wasn't just to document it. I mean, this is something that you hold dear to your own heart as well, right?
Of course. I mean, I'm not. Yeah. I mean, that's why I did it. It wasn't like this seems like an important thing to document. It was like something that I needed to do for myself. I wanted to make my commentary on America, and so it's interesting, I think, to note that the Greyhound, the Dirty Dog, was a kind of choice I made not because that was the subject, but because that was literally and figuratively a kind of vehicle that would enable me to photograph. I had no interest in driving across America like,
Hmm.
Kerouac did a fair amount with whatever his Dean Moriarty, the other guy that drove him around. It'll come back to me, but the bus would allow me to go out and be with people always. And every time that I stopped, I wouldn't be stopping in a gas station, getting out of my car, walking in and buying a soda and a hot dog. I'd be stepping off the bus, and there'd be 40 other people stepping off the bus. And often be downtown in the city. And so I could, get off the bus and walk through the city streets. And so it just allowed me to photograph not just when I arrived at a place, but to photograph while I was traveling. And one other noteworthy thing that you may not be aware of is I did the whole bus trip twice. I did it in 2000
Yeah.
in black and white because that's I tend to shoot in black and white, not color. And Robert
Hmm.
Frank's The Americans is a black and white project. And when I was done with it, I sent those photographs to the national desk editor at the New York Times, telling him I was already working for the New York Times for their national desk. And I said, I intend next summer, the summer of 2001, to go back out and buy another unlimited travel Ameripass Greyhound ticket and shoot
Hmm.
again and to complete a body of work that I'm going to make into a book. And I'm curious if you'd be interested in publishing, a picture from the road of America by bus every week, or a photo essay. And he said, "Oh, I'd love to do a photo essay. I mean, I can't promise you." And I said, "Well, would you provide me with film and processing where I could just basically ship my film to you and you would develop it, and then you'd ship me more film, and since you're going to consider publishing it, as long as I can maintain the rights." And he said, "Oh yeah, that's no problem." And then he said, "But you're going to shoot color, right?" And I was like, "Well, I wasn't planning on it." And he's like, "Well, we've switched to, everything gets shot on color. I mean, we're not a full color paper, but we'd love to do a color photo essay, and it has to be in color." And I remember talking to some photo friends of mine who thought that was ridiculous that I would go back and not follow my own instincts. But it didn't really matter to me, honestly. I kind of felt like the first summer, yeah, I could build on it a second summer, but I could also
Mm.
just go out and do it all again. I didn't think I would combine color and black and white. So I basically did the trip twice. I did it for 3 months in the summer of 2000, and then I did it for 3 or 4 months in the summer of 2001.
So Greyhound has a mystique in itself. I mean, how did you just decide it was going to be Greyhound? I mean, you say you didn't fancy driving, but you could have. I mean, you could have caught the train. You could have. I mean, there are multiple ways to get around the
Oh, yeah,
country.
but a train, I mean, the train is not, yeah, the bus was like, really kind of the salt of the earth of America, and I knew that.
It's gritty. It's definitely gritty.
And I knew that that's what I wanted. I mean, train stations may be in downtowns in America too, but the bus goes a lot more places. And with that Ameripass, you can get, a lot more across many more smaller and mid-sized towns where the train is very limited in the US. I mean, we got a pretty crappy train system. I suppose if we had like a European train system, I might have done the train, but the bus was definitely provided a lot of good photo opportunities of humanity, in America. So
Had you ridden Greyhound before? I mean, had you had any experience with Greyhound?
I
I mean,
yeah.
Greyhound from the outside is sleek and stylish, and it has that Art Deco vibe to it. But on the inside, it's not quite the same.
No, I had ridden the bus from here and there. Like I had gone to school in New York and took the bus like up to Boston, or a couple other times I took a bus from like Atlanta to Athens. And I've definitely ridden the bus, but I always had a car too, so it was never my preference to be on the bus for the sake of comfort or you know ease of movement, as I think it's talked about in that essay or that article on in Vice. It's definitely
Mhm.
true that you could be waiting for a bus, and then suddenly the guy closes the door and says, "No, you're not getting on," or the bus is an hour and a half late or 2 hours late. And waiting around bus stations in America at that time, it really was like a kind of purgatory. I think there were some aspects in that article that nailed it perfectly. It's
Oh, I have stories. I have ridden the dog.
yeah,
I did it from Auburn, Alabama to Missouri, and it was longer to take that 7-hour drive than it was to fly from Perth to the
yeah,
UK.
yeah,
And yeah, I've got my own stories, but I love it. I love that grittiness to it because it's it really is America. Getting into the downtown, getting into the train stations, getting to see those types of people,
yeah.
and obviously you wanted to see those people.
Yeah, I wanted to photograph them and the stories that I would hear. And you asked me in one of your questions. I definitely kept a journal, and I have some writing about like what I was observing and how much it embodied sort of, what's good and bad about America in the conversations you overhear and the connections you make, people that are sitting next to me that want to get out of the bus and smoke a joint in the middle of the night in a rest stop, or they're carrying a bottle and they're passing it over to you, or you're next to the bathroom and it stinks. I mean, it's just it's a rich experience, and I wanted that, and so, like I said, it was both getting off the bus and photographing America, but also that the bus would give me a good glimpse into the part of America that I was interested in, the kind of real America, because I'm not really interested in, like, I don't know, upscale, whatever, a cruise ship, or, Las Vegas in the casinos on the strip. I want more something that doesn't look like it's all polished and, create it to look and feel very clean and comfortable. I knew that that's not the truth about what's going on for most people in this country,
No, that's just the veneer.
Yeah.
Below that, there's something else.
And about the whole vagabonding thing, I think it's really important that that was a big. That's not. This is not the only trip I've been doing that. I think I've kind of stopped more recently as I've gotten older. I feel like I've kind of sown my oats or found what I was looking for, not necessarily on the road, but I spent a lot of my youth in between odd jobs and working as a freelance photographer to get out and travel, whether it was in the U.S. or abroad. I've traveled a lot and photographed a lot traveling, and so there's always something really liberating. And I think I said it in my essay in the One Summer Across America that Bob Dylan said Mona Lisa had the highway blues, and I know exactly what Bob Dylan was saying, because you can tell by the way she smiles, he says in that song Visions of Johanna. But it's like that feeling of being out on the road when you go to the end of the road, as far away from like whatever is normal or clean or polished or comfortable, and you're kind of really out in the depths of the heart of darkness, so to speak, but not in like a violent, dangerous way, but just more like you become anonymous, and
Mm.
you become kind of free of, like, whatever you think you're trying to do with your life. You can just kind of be in the moment, and as a photographer, that's when the magic happens. That's when I see things that kind of reflect that feeling, that feeling of anonymity and openness, and kind of just being a sponge sucking in kind of what's going on around you. And so, for me, that bus trip was like that. The second bus trip, the 2001, that was One Summer Across America, that became the
Mhm.
book. I also had an intention to try to find places that I could just throw my tent, or people who just let me sleep in their yards or in their houses. And there were multiple places I arrived that I didn't even try to find, like a hotel or a hostel or whatever, that I just went up to people and asked, could I pitch my tent in your yard? I did that in
Mm.
West Virginia. I did that in a lot of different places, just trying to find, it was just that idea of like that hobo idea, that's what, really connected me with Kerouac, this idea you like hop a train and get off and sit. Not that I've ever hopped trains, but that you
Mm.
get off somewhere and you don't know where you are, and you build a fire and eat a can of beans, that kind of thing, and you talk to somebody else that you met. It's an adventure, it's fun. I mean, it's not the lifestyle I'd want to live for the rest of my life, not even then. But I connected with people, and I admired people that I met that were living that life. I met people that were traveling for years nonstop and just doing odd jobs to keep traveling. And I always questioned myself if I could do that. But the longest trip I ever did was, like 9 months or something like that. It just,
That's still substantial.
yeah,
I mean, I loved your introduction. I loved the way you talked about the anonymity, the freedom, the no future, no past, and just being in the moment, because so much of life is planning the future or regretting the past.
yeah.
You were there and you're present and life is happening. Now, the one thing that you just talked about there that I didn't think about so much, but because you're a photographer and you're there as an observer, how distant were you from the subjects? I mean, you obviously you wrote notes and obviously you had communication with people, but to some degree you're there to observe. How much did it become part of your world as well?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I wanted that distance from my life, but I mean, I definitely didn't mind. I wasn't trying to be distant from everything. I mean, it was, there's a lot of pictures in One Summer Across America where the face fills the frame, or the people are pretty
Mm.
prominent in the frame. So like, there's a young couple in the back of the bus that there was like, there were a bunch of teenagers in the back of the bus in Montana, and I'm sitting back there, and they're kind of joking with me that I'm old and over the hill as a 30-year-old something. And then this young kid who I photographed with this, beautiful blonde. They're both two beautiful people. Keisha and Roman is the guy's name. I don't put their names in the book, but
Hmm.
they met on the bus, and they were clearly the prettiest two of the whole group of teenagers, which is why they were the couple. And then the light came shafting through the side of the bus, and this kid is quoting Jim Morrison, who's like one of my favorite musicians, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm just gonna have my kicks before the old shit house goes up in flames." And I'm like, and he's like, "Your generation screwed it all up for us." And I'm like, "Yeah, yep, yep, yep. I hear you. I was you minus the beautiful looks and the beautiful girl."
Now, one thing I want to you mentioned the Ameripass.
Yeah,
It doesn't exist today.
no.
Can you explain that a little bit? And how much did you have to pay to do the? Because it wasn't just 3 months. There was a 3 month, 6 month, 9 month, or something like
I
that
think
as
I
well,
did a
wasn't there?
3. I think it was, according to the articles, I look back in the article because I hadn't read it in many years, but and it seems right. There was a 1, 2, or 3 month. I don't know that they went longer. There might have been, but I did the 3 month, uh, and I believe it was like 379. So it was like $400 for 3 months, and you literally could go nonstop every day. And in fact, I did some other hitchhiking, a little bit of driving in the beginning, and I started. My parents had a house in Sanibel, Florida, and so I caught the Greyhound in Sanibel, and I think I went down to Key West first, and then when I got on the bus after spending a little time in Key West, I actually asked the guy to print out a ticket, because you just go up to the Ameripass and say, I want to go to blank. And then they'd print out a boarding pass, and then you wait for the next bus that's on that route. And I had this crazy idea. I was going to take the bus from Miami to Seattle. I thought this will be the
Mm.
great way to start the whole damn thing off, is like go diagonally the longest distance across America, from Key West to, Seattle. And I made it to Atlanta, and that was like 24 hours. And I was back home, and I got off the bus, and I'm like, I think I'm going to go up to Chattanooga and stop. But, yeah, so it's $400, and you could just go endlessly, you know what I mean? And I did probably 8,000 miles that summer. I mean, I zigzagged. It was not 20-hour rides, 24-hour rides. I had a 40-hour ride from, Seattle down to New Mexico or something at one point.
Now, before you got on the bus, did you have a negative, positive, undetermined feeling about getting on the bus? Were they your people? Were they just people? How did you feel about that? Did you have any preconceptions?
Yeah. I mean, I don't wanna sound, and I don't believe that I'm truly like, feel like I'm better than somebody. It's not
Because
like,
the Vice article's rough.
yeah. I mean, if I'm being completely honest, it's not like I grew up having to ride the bus everywhere I went. I mean, I got a car when I was 16, and started doing road trips in cars. So, but the bus for me was like, just like I said before, I feel like it's more salt of the earth, and that's more interesting to me than sort of people dress nice. I think I kind of grew up upper middle class in
Mhm.
America, in the suburbs, and there was always a lot of pressure from my peer group of like, what are you going to do for money? And, and the whole idea is your status is your career, your money, your car, your clothes, your good looking girlfriend or whatever. And to me, that all seemed so meaningless and shallow. And so that's why I was inspired by the beatniks, and the hippies and that whole idea of just kind of, put on some shabby clothes, like cut off jeans and a t-shirt, which is what I'm wearing right now out of my backyard. And
Hmm.
just kind of be among people that aren't going to judge you because you don't have a nice shirt or a nice car or a good job. It was more like a chance to kind of just connect with people that I found more interesting to talk to than.
They're not stories that you'll hear every day. I
Right.
mean,
Yeah.
society is very stratified here, so the people that you're going to meet and the stories that you're going to hear are not stories you're going to hear anywhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you don't mind, I'll try to keep it short, but I pulled out this little journal entry. I don't think it might take me 2 minutes to read, but
I don't care how much time you take. It doesn't bother me. This is a podcast. We are governed by your time.
yeah, well, you can cut things out too and get it to the length you
Sure.
want it. But in reading that article, it reminded me that and this is in my rabbit book, which we can circle back around to.
Indeed.
But it's got photographs from the 2000 trip in my rabbit book because that's the book is all black and white. But the journal entry underneath these photos is from 2001, and here's what it says: I'm on the bus from Pittsburgh to Memphis. There's a nasty, greasy smudge of hair oil, thick like Vaseline, with several pieces of stringy hair on the bus window next to the person in the seat in front of me. I'm surrounded by all sorts of desperate American souls. There's this blonde woman who's come all the way from Boston last night with bare midriff revealing a giant tattoo around her belly button and an air cast on her ankle. She says she has a ruptured Achilles tendon. She talks incessantly to anybody and everybody on the bus about how her man beat her. She left him. She's going to Tennessee to go to a battered woman's shelter. She's made at least 5 trips to the bathroom already, and we've only been on the road for 2 hours. I wonder what she's doing in there. There's a sweet, gentle, elderly black couple across from me, a very large, fat woman, and an equally large and somewhat crippled man with a straw hat, sunglasses, and a bright, flowery shirt. There's a redneck guy next to me sporting a blonde mullet, beer belly, and too tight t shirt, and race car driver wraparound Oakley sunglasses. There's these two French guys with stylish haircuts, short with styling cream in it, spiked on the top. One of them is delicately holding a fresh, beautiful long stem rose. I wonder what the story behind that is. I could go on endlessly about the idiot behind me and his obediently silent wife. The man keeps asking me dozens of stupid questions, so innocently and sincerely, really wanting to know how all of this madness riding the bus is going to work. He started in the station as we were waiting for the bus. Quote, which bus are they putting us on? Are we going to make it on time? Boy, this bus is going to be full, huh? On and on he goes. The beer belly mullet guy next to me keeps shifting positions every 10 minutes, doing the Greyhound shuffle, always searching, never finding the comfortable position to try to sleep for a couple of minutes. Now he's bent over, face in hands, crown of his head resting on the seat in front. I'm becoming more and more convinced that there's something really amazing and revealing about riding on this bus. Something that's so American. It's like frozen TV dinners, dipsy dumpsters, undercooked scrambled eggs. Everybody is angry, sad, tired, sick, injured, lonely, and lost. It's like you take all the wealth and waste and greed and lust and consumption that is America and put it in a pot with chicken guts and greasy clumps of hair and chemical orange hot dogs, and you let it simmer until it starts to smell like an open sewer. Let it cool down for a while. Try to clean it up and straighten it out into something that might pass as humanity. Put it on a bus racing across America, and you have something that looks and feels like the Greyhound.
I have felt those emotions. I have seen that scene.
Yeah.
But I had a different impression of bus transport. When I got on, I had Eurail in my mind. I had, the InteRail going through Europe. They get on, get off, students everywhere and backpacks. And that was not, it was what you described,
Yeah.
not what I was
Well,
thinking.
the irony is, like, I met this Polish guy in Key West, and we met up and traveled later in Southeast Asia, and he took the buses in Mexico. And then I met when I was traveling in Nicaragua once. I met these German guys that also came to America and Mexico and took buses, and they were like, "God, the buses in Mexico are great. They leave on time. You buy a seat, you get an actual seat number. You can choose a window or an aisle. They leave on time, and they give you drinks and things. And then the Greyhound is this mess. Like it's just." chaos.
I didn't meet Black America. I arrived in Auburn, Alabama.
Uh-huh.
But I did not meet Black America until I rode the Greyhound.
Yeah.
I mean, such as the stratifications of society.
Yeah.
And I remember sharing a cigarette with a guy in Birmingham, Alabama. We were outside and we were both speaking English, but very, very different forms of English.
Yeah.
I just come from the northeast of England. He had obviously his Birmingham drawl,
Yeah.
and both speaking English, but we couldn't understand one another. But we still shared a cigarette and enjoyed that evening as the sun went down.
Yeah.
I got bumped from my bus. So when you explained the you not guaranteed a seat, my backpack made it to Missouri before I did.
No, yeah, I know. And you got to wait. You wait in line, and it's everybody sort of fighting for themselves to get in line and hold that spot in line. Like you've got to go to the bathroom. You might be waiting for an hour or 5 hours in the bus station, and the next bus has only got whatever it is, 46 seats or whatever, and you're like 30 back, and you're wondering how many people that are on the bus when it arrives are going to stay on the bus. And
Oh yeah.
yeah, it's a big hustle, but yeah, I mean, what I just read to you, that all those feelings I described, lost, lonely,
Hmm.
sad, sick, and all that. I mean, I think there's also joy, and I think what's ironic about the One Summer Across America book is that it actually has some joy in it. I mean, and the color, ironically, while I didn't intend to shoot color initially, the color added some liveliness and warmth and joy in it. So there's actually, it's not just a look at impoverished, unhappy people that are forced to ride the bus.
I didn't get that feeling.
Uh,
I got the feeling as a snapshot in time. And I like the fact that you use color because the time that you took it was 2000, and
yeah,
I think that fit the mood.
yeah, 2001.
Yeah, I'm thinking the way when you originally uh, talked about the book, you mentioned 2000,
Yeah.
but yes, it's that early time frame in the millennium.
Yeah, and that's what I thought about too. That's what I was pitching it to people, including the New York Times editor, was like, that was kind of a pinnacle moment, actually. America had been very prosperous again, kind of the biggest decade of growth in the 90s, and coming out of the Clinton years, and things had really been kind of booming, and everybody thought America was doing really great, and I was very interested in that idea to sort of look at America at another time, like Robert Frank in the 50s, when America was kind of, considered doing really well, and wanting to kind of pull the curtain back at like the people that are, still struggling just to try to find peace or happiness, or, get from point A to point B.
There's definitely forgotten people, that's for sure. I experienced it in I mean, I came to America in '99, so I experienced it very much so.
Yeah.
Um, Now, you didn't just obviously see people on the bus, and you didn't just communicate with them. You actually went and visited towns along the
Right.
way.
Yeah. I mean,
Uh,
half the book is not bus pictures. Yeah.
Absolutely, it's not. I think of the bus because I think of the stories on the bus. But obviously, you visited towns. I mean, how did that work out? How did you choose those towns and the people that you met along the way? And obviously, you had a camera in your hand.
Yeah.
How do you get from ha- when this is a different time in America? This isn't where everybody's used to having a camera in their
No,
face.
no, no, this was,
So,
yeah, the internet was out, and that had changed things to some extent, but still people were much more open. Now, with the internet and smartphones and all that and social media, people are even, I mean, they're very cautious. I mean, it's ironic, if you're just taking pictures with your phone, nobody pays attention anymore. It's like
mhm.
everybody's always got their phone out filming and or videoing and photographing everything, but at that time, I did carry a set of pictures from the summer before. I had a little booklet I printed up, and so
Mhm.
I showed people that. So if people were like, "What are you doing?" And that's always been a ticket for me. I mean, I teach photography, and a lot of people ask me, "How do you go up to stranger? Or how do you photograph people? And how do you get them to be willing to be photographed?" And I always say, be open, be accessible, be vulnerable, and explain exactly why you're doing it. And it'll be very obvious if why you're doing it is kind of a reason that they don't like, that they're not going to want to do it. Then, but me, always said, I want to kind of capture the America that I know. I'm trying to do a book
Mhm.
about America, and that's why I'm on the bus, because this is the America that I feel like is not really represented in on TV programs or in the news. I mean, it's not some horrible, tragic catastrophe happening here, but this is just like, this is real people living their lives, and I'm
Mm,
interested in you, I love, and I say things like that. I just love the way that you two met in the back of the bus, and
mhm,
or I think it's so cool, this guy that I photographed smoking pot in his Volkswagen bus outside an old folks home in San Diego, and I'm like, he's like, "You wanna get stoned with me in my bus?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure, man, absolutely." And then he had this whole ritual, like, and he's got an extension cord running from the retirement home, and I'm sure he says, "They're pissed off at me. I just sit out here and smoke pot all day long." He said, "But we can't just smoke it. We gotta do this, fill it up in a balloon, and we gotta say a prayer to the earth, and you can't let any bit of the smoke out," And I'm like, "Can I take your picture?" And he's like, "Oh, well, yeah," and it's like stuff like that that was just so much fun, and then people say, "Hey, you wanna come back and stay at my place?" And
mhm,
I'm like, "Yeah, of course, because I wanna photograph you more." I mean, obviously, I'm sort of gauging, are they dangerous?
mhm,
But I wanted that kinda, like, to be able to walk into people's lives, and I did that a lot on and off the bus, I mean,
mm.
um, I don't know if that answered your question exactly.
But you didn't treat them like animals on a safari.
No.
You treat them like human beings that had a story to tell and the richness that goes with that. I wanna stray away from the Vice article because I mean, I like humanity in all its forms. I don't necessarily consider myself above it. I'm a working class boy.
Yeah.
And I thought you were very respectful of the photos that you took. You just captured the humanity.
Thank you. Well, I mean, it's important for me. I do not want to feel like I'm just taking from people, and I want to feel like there's a connection that's being expressed in the photographs. If I'm taking a picture that feels too, like, hard, exploitative, or making fun of somebody, I really don't want it. I mean, I guess maybe the classic image, and I mean, I don't know how people are going to see images in the book, but there was a family in Pittsburgh where the man was like fishing, and the kid was on a little scooter, and the woman was sunbathing in a parking lot underneath a freeway by the river. And I saw him, and I went up to him first, and talked to him, and he said something to me like, "I know this looks ridiculous, like, we're having a recreation in a parking lot next to a river in the industrial center of the city." He said, I work 6 days a week, and this is, the only day I off. Then I'm trying to do something for my kids, but we barely got enough money to buy our groceries. And so everybody can kind of get a little bit of what they want here. And I talked to him for a while, and then I was like, that's what really drew me to you. I thought this is really interesting, and I meant it. I didn't mean,
Mm,
I think this is ridiculous, or I want to laugh at what you're doing. I thought, this is a scene that's really true and real. And I thought of my own dad telling me stories of his dad on his one day off doing something to take the kids out, and I felt like
mhm.
this is really what it is that I want. And then I said, "Do you mind if I take pictures?" And he said, "No, go for it. I mean, show the world how, working man has to, like, try to make ends meet to give his family a chance to have a little recreation. And I'm like, "Cool."
Well, I think people need to see that humanity as well.
Yeah.
We live in our bubbles. And so ends the first part of Bobby's interview. I don't want to keep the audio rolling unnecessarily, so all I can say is I hope that you found it interesting enough to download the next episode. Special thanks to Tom Jode and Kelly Weiss for providing music for the show, and thank you to you all for listening to Skippycast. You're listening to Skippycast. I'm David McFee. Skippycast is a podcast about hobo-like travel. Thanks for downloading this episode 7. At least, I think it's 7. It's actually the second part of my interview with Bobby Abrahamson about his 2001 trip across America by Greyhound. And if you haven't listened to the first part, please go back and check that out. And without any delay, onto the second part of my interview. So what towns did you visit? I mean, 6,000 miles, right?
8.
So
8.
8,000 miles, I beg your pardon.
Yeah.
So can you give me a rough outline of where and when and how?
Sure.
You can either take the 2000 or the 2001 or just
No, let's just do the
generalize.
2001. Started in Florida. Actually, but that's not true. I started in Atlanta and I drove up into the mountains. And there's a couple pictures of wrestling, like semi-pro wrestling, and
I remember those.
somebody selling something on the side of the highway that I pulled over and photographed. And then I drove down to Florida where my parents were, and then I caught the bus, and so I shot some pictures in the Fort Myers bus station. I went down to Key West, and then went from Key West intending to go all the way to Seattle, but photographed on the bus. The cover picture was on the bus coming north from Key West of this woman who I'd met in the hostel in Key West, sleeping in the seat behind me. So I actually knew her, and she knew I was photographing her. Not that when she was asleep, but I had already asked her if I could take her picture.
Is that the one that's on the cover?
Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Okay, I will put a link because you can see some of these pictures, and obviously I will encourage people to buy it as well.
Okay, and on my website, there's also a gallery of all 50 pictures, so you'll find that too. So if you go to the book, you can also look through all 50 photos and not buy the book if you don't want to, and you can see what all the 50 photos are. And 50 seemed like a good number since there's 50 states, but I didn't go to all 50 states. So I went up to Chattanooga. I stopped there. I had a student that I had taught at the University of Georgia that let me stay with them. Some point I went to Savannah too. I definitely went to Savannah and took some pictures there too. And then I went up to West Virginia, then up to Pittsburgh, or no, New York, then New York up to Boston, Boston up over to Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh down to Houston, and there's stops in between here too. Houston over to Austin, Austin up to Wichita, because I heard there was an abortion protest going on there at the abortion clinic, and I got off the bus and hitched a ride with some guy in a pickup truck to the abortion clinic, and then I went from Wichita up to Colorado, and then I hitched a ride with some people in the car they call the tuna boat, because there's some places I had to hitch because the bus didn't go,
Sure.
and sometimes that makes sense because I'm not a big time hitchhiker, but when you're in like middle of nowhere America, then it's much more common, like in Alaska or Montana, there is nothing, just dirt roads, and the only way you're going to get there is hitch a ride with, a truck or a snowplow operator or something like that.
Were you used to hitching? I don't want to derail you, but is that something that you've
That's what I'm saying. I'm not a big time. I would not get out on the side of a freeway. I've never done that, but I have hitched in places like Alaska, Montana,
Okay.
Oregon, back in the country somewhere. Like when you're like coming off a trail hike, and there's a 2-lane state highway, and everybody else is like local people. There's a lot of people out hitching there. That's more safe for me. I wouldn't want to get on a stranger on the side of the interstate. That's but so yeah. So going forward, Colorado, and then at some point I went up to Montana, and then I crossed over. I met some people. I think that was the year before. It's hard to keep track. I went to Oregon, and up into Seattle and north of Seattle, and then I went down to LA, and then I went zigzag back over to Las Vegas, and then back to LA, and then back up to San Francisco, and that was the end of the trip. And I ended it in San Francisco at my sister's house in Palo Alto, and sent all of the film that I had left to the New York Times. So
I thought it was 60 days. I wasn't sure, but 60 days might have
90,
been the
90,
Okay.
90, and there were probably 20 days, 15 or 20 days before that, when I was driving in North Georgia and driving down to Florida, that I shot some other pictures too. I might have
How
driven to Savannah too. That might have been before going to catch the bus. Yeah.
what was it like? I mean, was it man with a camera in a small backpack and some toiletries, or did you? How much did you carry on the road?
Yeah, that was it. I mean, in a bag of 20 or 30 rolls of film, and I had a small little bag with 2 cameras and 4 lenses. One camera was always around my neck with 1 lens, and the other
Hmm.
bag, the bag, which was really small, it's about the size of a, I don't know, like a loaf of bread, maybe. It's a small camera bag, and that had 1 body and 3 lenses, and then I had the other camera around my neck, and then a backpack, and the backpack had the film in it, and I always kept that stuff near me, and when I slept, wherever I slept, I put the camera and the film inside my sleeping bag underneath my feet, so somebody
Mm.
would have to kind of open my sleeping bag to get to it, and I had all my money and my Ameripass and my, everything like that was in my money belt under my pants. So, yeah, I was very aware that somebody could try to take my cameras or.
And we're talking as well. I mean, expensive items.
Yeah, they were. They are. Yeah.
Now you mentioned that you did just camp at some people's houses, and you
Yeah.
mentioned the hostel. Did you? What was it like? What was your off the bus experience? Because I mean, a lot of people just sleep on the bus. I mean, that's the interrail type of idea. What?
Yeah, I can't sleep on a bus. I'm like that guy I described, you put your hands up on you put your head on the seat in front of you and you're like and then you got your neck and the next thing you know you wake up and you're like, you're frozen stiff. No, I don't that if you could get 2 seats on a bus, that would work. You could kinda lay
Mm.
down and then maybe sleep laying on the 2 seats, but,
But you weren't
um
staying at the Marriott by any chance when you went
no,
to
no,
town.
I did youth hostels on occasion in cities where I knew that they existed.
Hmm.
I had friends. I was part of like a email photo group, and I had lined up places to stay in Houston, in Austin. I had my sister in California. I had a friend in north of Seattle. So I stayed with friends in certain places, and then hostels, and then on occasion, like I went down to. I forgot this part. Actually, I didn't give the whole itinerary because I went down all the
Hmm.
way to Clarksdale, Mississippi.
Hmm.
I wanted to go to the crossroads, the proverbial crossroads, to meet
Okay,
the
you're going to have to explain that.
uh,
I'm missing something, and I've lived down that area.
Oh, well,
Crossroads.
yeah, okay, so there's a famous story of, Robert Johnson, the blues guitarist who, supposedly went to the crossroads in Clarksdale, Mississippi, and met the devil there and made a deal with the devil to, be a great guitar player in exchange for his soul.
Okay.
And I thought I already met the devil, so, like, I have to rewind here, and it's in my rabbit book, but when my whole photography changed is when I was going to school in New York, and, we had an assignment to photograph on 57th and 5th Avenue, and I put, uh, 10 rolls of film in my pocket because this famous photographer said, "To be a good photographer, all you have to do is shoot 10 rolls of film a day," and I had not felt like I was really at the point that I needed to be at, so I said, "I'm
Hmm.
gonna go out there and shoot 10 rolls of film," and I came up from the subway and this man in a fedora was standing there looking at me, and we never exchanged a word, and he was standing like 15 feet or 10 feet in front of me, and he kind of tipped his hat like signaling it was okay for me to take his picture, and I took his picture, and from that moment forward my photography was transformed, and so I felt like I had to go to the crossroads, and that was the crossroads in New York. I thought maybe I'd see him again in Clarksdale, Mississippi, the devil.
So obviously, I mean, obviously, with your background, you had no reservations about taking people's photos or approaching people.
No.
That was never an issue.
No, I mean, I'm conscious that sometimes people don't want their picture taken, and I I
Mm.
I I don't take pictures of people if they say don't,
Mm.
but sometimes I take pictures without them knowing I'm taking their picture, and that's alright, but yeah, like I said before, I think knowing what you're doing, presenting yourself as, equal and open to them and explaining that to them it gives it diffuses a lot of the anxiety that people have, and I showed them and bringing with you a selection of work that's part of the project. It lets people understand what you're doing. I mean, now with the internet, and I think even then I had a website, so I was like I would give people links to my website. Of course they didn't have smartphones, they couldn't look it up instantly to see what my work was about, but that's why I carried work with me. But I had a card with my phone number. I think I even had
Mm.
my street address, my mailing address, and I would give
Mm.
that to them. So I'm like, "Look, I trust you enough that I'm gonna give you all my contact information, my name, my phone number, my mail address, my email address. If you think I'm up to something bad, yeah, you either don't do it or you can call me later and hound me or whatever. But I never you asked in a question, I never got releases.
I mean, I don't know enough about photography and people's likenesses and things like that. And obviously, this was a different time as well.
Yeah, but no, there's a lot of photographers, and when I worked for some magazines, they required that. I mean,
Mm,
it's insurance against a lawsuit. I mean, the
mm,
the rules are effectively that in America, free speech kind of trumps privacy in a public space, and so
hmm
the idea that anybody can take a picture of anybody else in a public space has been tested again and again. The,
mm,
the, the question becomes when you misrepresent them or you're like trying to intentionally embarrass them. If it's
mm,
slander or libel, you could get sued for that. But of course, nothing would stop you from getting sued.
mm.
It's just you probably would win, but you'd have to lawyer up and all that. But I've
No, yeah, yeah.
but I've been doing this, since 1988, and do the math for yourself, 35 years or something, and knock on wood. I mean, I published many books and published a lot of
Mm.
my photographs, and I've had a couple instances where somebody said, I wished you hadn't done that, but
Oh, really? Mm,
only a couple. But I have been slapped in the face once for taking somebody's picture.
really?
Yeah.
Can you go into detail?
Well, that was in Belgium, and
Oh, okay. So not on this trip, but just as part
no,
of your.
no, and it was like I went to a neighborhood that was like like immigrants, Arabs or whatever, and a friend of mine who I was staying with in Poland said, "Don't go there." And he said some things that I thought was pretty racist about it, but then I went there anyway because I was interested. There was like an amusement park, and I was taking a picture of like a doorway, and there was like people tiny. I mean, they'd be like tiny in the frame. You couldn't see them, you wouldn't recognize them. But this guy, came up to me after I took the picture, and he was like, "You got to take the film out of there." And in broken English, was like, "No, you can't do that." And I'm like, "I'm sorry, but I won't take any more." And I said something like, "Let's call the police if you're bothered by what I did." And then I think he had to save face in front of his friends, so
Mm,
he slapped me. I thought I was going to get killed, but
hmm,
he slapped me, and then that he just slapped me. He didn't punch me either or stab me or anything. He just slapped me across the face. It was kind of a mild slap too. It was just sort of like more like for everybody to see that he was being, defensive of his
mm,
community. And honestly, I've always told that to students that I teach. I mean, you may have a legal right, but morally, I mean, it's there's no you don't have a advantage or privilege to take people's pictures. I mean, everybody has a right to be angry and not want their
mm.
picture taken. I don't believe in that. I know a lot of photographers who think it's the First Amendment and free speech, and I think that's bullshit. Honestly, I mean, if I don't want to take a picture of somebody if they're going to be hurt by it. That's not why I'm doing it. That there's no point in that unless they're like hurting somebody else, and I want to capture them doing that so I could prove that they did that. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But yeah.
Of your journey, what was the most? I mean, it must have been incredibly in terms of fatigue and keeping clean and the emotional strain. But what was the most difficult part?
Hmm. Uh, yeah,
Because it's
that's
not
a good
exactly an easy way to go about 90 days on the road on a bus, taking photos, and constantly trying to be aware of your surroundings.
yeah. I mean, I think it's more just I mean, I don't know if it was the toughest part, but, definitely it is physically, exhausting and it makes you very physically sore, like spending 20, 30, 40 hours on a bus, trying to sleep. And then, of course, you're not eating good either because, you're eating whatever where they stop to eat or things out of machines and stuff like that. And so,
Mm.
it just you start to feel like, ugh. And then, you're meeting people who want to smoke pot or drink. I mean, and then you're, like, drunk or stoned on the bus and, like, yeah, I mean, when I got on the bus in Key West, or maybe it was Atlanta, this woman sat down next to me, and she wanted to smoke a joint, like, at a rest stop, and then we sat back down on the bus together, and I realized what a huge mistake that was because she started talking to me endlessly about, her whole sad life story, and I was like, "What did I do?" And now I'm, like, high, and so, I mean, it's just exhausting, but honestly, I felt such a privilege and
Mm.
a luxury to be able to not work and just ride the bus and take pictures. So for me, I knew I could return to like a job and a home and my car, and I don't have to ride the bus every day, you know.
Mm.
So I really didn't feel. Uh, I think I was just very excited, honestly, you know, to be doing what I had dreamed of. I mean, since I heard of Robert Frank in
Mm.
school in New York in 1994, and this is, you know, 8 years, 7 years later, whatever, I was finally getting to kind of do what he did. And I was just extremely excited. You know, I was going to make a book. So I had a plane ticket to fly from San Francisco to Bangkok. And this is again speaking of my own privilege. So I was going to do this whole bus trip, and I thought that the New York Times was going to publish this photo essay. And I was kind of torn about that because they wanted it to be about the Greyhound,
Mm.
riding the Greyhound one summer across America. And I wanted
Mhm.
to do a book about America in homage to Robert Frank's The Americans. And
Mhm.
before him, Robert Frank did his book in homage to Walker Evans, who did American photographs in the 30s. So there was this long tradition of this documentary lyrical narrative in photographs about America. And this was going to be my first book in homage to my favorite heroes, but I was doing, you know, side car thing with the New York Times, and they were going to publish an essay. And I was worried that this was going to like distort like what I thought were the good pictures. And anyway, when I got to California and I was getting ready to fly out to Thailand, I called up the New York Times editor, and he said, "We just ran a story on a photo essay on forest fire fighters in the West, and it's a full color photo essay, 2 pages. So we're not going to run another one for at least another month, and then your picture is going to be too old at that point." So he said, "What do you want me to do with all your negatives?"
Oh, wow.
And I said, "Oh, send them out here to me." I had like a week and a half before I flew to Bangkok, and this is the end of August 2001. And so I went to a rental darkroom in on the other side. My sister was on the peninsula in Palo Alto, Los Altos, and I went over to Oakland, or Haywood, I think it was, across the bay. You know, drove my sister's car or whatever over there, and for a week I went in and printed all my pictures. I got terribly excited. I couldn't sleep at night. I was like, this is great, you know. It's like the kind of Buddhist principle of not getting what you want is like a gift. I realized now that I didn't have to get bogged down in the idea of the photo essay in the New York Times. Now the
Mm.
pictures could be my book, my story. And I was just madly printing all the pictures I could to see what they looked like, because all I
Mhm.
had was the negatives. You know, they didn't
Mm.
make prints, they just developed the film. And I had color negatives. And I'm going out there and just printing. And to save time, I didn't make color adjustments for the different kind of lighting it was in. So white balance, if you would call it that, for color film. And so I printed them all. So that's why I got these kind of sick yellows and green colors in all my prints, which I actually turned out loving because they were all balanced for daylight, even though it was shot under fluorescent and tungsten
Mm.
light. And I made 120, 130 8x10 prints, and then I put them in a box and I FedExed them back to Atlanta on September 10th, 2001, to my friend Manuel. And I'm like, man, hold on to this for me. When I get back from Asia, I'm making my Americans book. And, uh, and then I was hiking up in the California hills on September 11th when all that happened.
Mm.
And my package of all my prints and negatives going back to Atlanta was like frozen
Oh,
wherever it was, you know, because all the flights were canceled. And then I really started thinking about not going to Southeast Asia because I thought, well, everything's going to change in America now, and there's going to be a war, and I'm against war, and I want to have a protest, be part of like not letting us go to war in Iraq or Afghanistan or whatever. And I called up my dad, and they bumped my flight back from September 12th, and they said, well, next time we're flying again, you can change your flight. And my dad was like, "Are you fucking crazy, Bobby? You've been dreaming of going to Southeast Asia for, years, and you got this whole thing booked." And so I caught a flight. I think it was September 14th or 15th to Bangkok, and
wow.
and then I got an email from my friend Manuel that the package arrived. And so I spent the next 6 months. This is the 9 month trip or 10 month
Mm.
trip. So I didn't ever go home. I went from San Francisco to Thailand, and then I traveled 6 months, six countries, again doing the same thing, but where the color work in America was very, very raw and exhausting, and like all this intensity and kind of like really trying to capture like kind of the angst and all that. Then in Southeast Asia, I was really shooting black and white again, going down dusty roads to the end of nowhere, and then I got back and I started to work on my book, and so that came back in March or April of 2002.
Back then, there weren't many jobs that you could be a vagabond. I mean,
No,
photographer or a journalist. Those are your options.
and I'd worked at like a summer camp as like a maintenance person. I would take odd jobs, and I went back and lived with my parents, in
Mm.
Atlanta and then in Florida, so I could afford to kind of do the shit too. So,
The book is a future thing. I mean, you talk about it in your introduction about the present. What was the thing that you enjoyed the most about being on that journey?
um, I mean, I think what I said. I think what I said in the introduction is that what I enjoyed the most was like the freedom of it and the escape of it. There's something, yeah, I know you were gonna ask me about my rabbit book, and the One Summer was the first, and the rabbit is my most recent. But
Mm,
there's been a kind of through line in my work, which has been that I travel and I photograph, but I don't consider usually that what I'm photographing is like a document of a place or a time as much as it's a document of something internal. Like I see
mm,
reflected in the landscape around me something that I'm feeling. And so when I did One Summer Across America, both summers that I traveled by bus,
mm,
it was reflecting a certain angst or, question or problem I had with kind of the popular narrative about America being this happy place where everybody's dreams comes true, and
okay.
and then yeah, so I went to Southeast Asia or Latin America and other places in the rabbit book. Then it's not so much about those places either. It's about the escape. The So it's always been kind of that ability and pleasure in sort of being free to sort of see and photograph uh, the world reflecting my feelings or perceptions or attitudes about it.
Is it a little bit like being out of time? I mean, that's the way I
Yeah.
always thought
Yeah,
about
it's
it.
very meditative. I mean, that's the thing is in the moment, it's wonderfully quiet, peaceful, satisfying, content, all those kind of things. It's a kind of meditative process, and it's a much harder to do when like you just go out for an hour and photograph because
Mm.
you're walking right back into your life again. But and and now with cell phones, of course, you got to turn the thing off, otherwise you'll never escape it. But
Oh, God.
with the traveling at that time, yeah, I mean, so you asked me like what was the hardest part, but I mean, the idea of spending 30 or 40 hours on a bus, it just meant that I had 30, 40 hours that I just had to, you know, kind of take things in, and eventually I was so exhausted that I'd stop somewhere for 4 or 5 days and sleep all day, because I
But
finally had a bed and maybe air conditioning or something like that, that I could actually get a comfortable night's sleep. But
well,
so
a lot of people don't get a chance to think, and you got that chance to think. You got the
yeah,
chance to think about every single thing that you've ever wanted to think about in that time frame.
yeah, and I was often questioning like, what am I really looking for, and why am I doing this, and when am I going to find my peace, my joy, and I think there was a big part of that was built into the traveling too. I think it's like these two things. One is that kind of reaching that kind of meditative nirvana space where you're just observing and kind of open and present in the moment. And the other part was this sort of searching for myself and escaping. There's this kind of like spiritual journey, if you will. And the irony, of course, is that I mean, in terms of the second idea that I knew all along, but I kept doing it for a long time, that you're not going to find yourself out there if you can't find yourself anywhere else. You know what I mean? It's like trying to find like what's going to give my life meaning or peace. Ultimately, is like something very internal. But of course, yeah, like you said, you have the time to ponder it, and that's really a real gift to be able to have that, a blessing.
Absolutely. Well, there's a reason they call it a rat race.
Yeah. So, and the rabbit book, which is my most recent one, is like it
Mm.
has a lot of journals. And when I exhibited the One Summer Across America, when I
Mhm.
published the book in Atlanta, I didn't publish it in Atlanta, it was printed in Serbia, that's a different story, but, when I had the exhibit in Atlanta, I included the black and white and the color pictures, and then included, like, my bus ticket and my passport and journal entries and letters I had written and letters I had received and maps and the maps from the Greyhound bus company with, all their routes and my circles and marks and phone numbers I had written and, you know, and I wanted it to feel like that, like you could be inside of my head, sort of
Mm,
escaping and exploring and wandering so I've and the Rabbit book is that too. The Rabbit book is sort of like from 1994 till 2023. Really, it's sort of a document of all those wanderings and so I kind of feel like in a way the Rabbit and One Summer together are kind of like this cohesive body of work about a part of me that I don't feel like I'm really there anymore. I feel like I've kind
mm,
of moved. I don't really want to find the answer out there. I feel like the answer is right here. Finding my place, my home. I feel like I got it now, and so I have a lot less interest in doing that kind of vagabonding or hoboing, as you would put it now, because I feel like for me it was always a kind of an escape and a search, as well
mhm.
as an opportunity to take pictures. Uh, and now when I moved out to Oregon, I can just, go spend a week and catch a train or a bus or
Mhm.
drive. And, I just did that. I went out to Astoria and then spent one night on the coast and took 5 rolls of film. And then I come back home, and I got my dog and my house and my bed and my books and I finally figured out that, like, yeah, you can't run away from yourself and you can't find yourself out there on the road. You're always you're always there wherever you are.
I don't want to keep it too long, but I do. There are some points I want to hit, and one of them is you mentioned September the 11th. Now, I didn't realize that you'd done two separate trips. I didn't realize you'd done a pre 9/11 and a post
No,
9/11.
they're both pre. I mean, I did one in 2000 and one in 2001 prior to September 11th.
Oh, okay, okay. Because that's interesting. I watched a great documentary. It was about a flop house in downtown New York, but it was pre September the 11th, and it had that video-ish feel to it. But it also you could kind of sense there was something different. It was different to what you think of as being post. Do you think it was a different America that you photographed in 2000 and 2001 to what happened post? Do you think you would get the same narrative today as you did, like, say, before September the 11th? Do you think that was had a big impact?
I mean, that's a good question. That's an interesting question. I mean, the guy that wrote the primary afterward was Tom Southall, who was
Hmm.
a curator, and he actually pondered or speculated that I would, that it wouldn't make a difference. And I think there's some truth to that. I mean, I feel like at the time, I mean, I think we all thought after September 11th that the world and certainly the U.S. had changed. And for me, the biggest thing that changed was not some kind of vulnerability or the war on terror or whatever. It was the war on terror. It was the idea that, like, there was this kind of nationalist, militarist, like, we're going to go out and punish. eh, But that seemed not completely different from what preceded 9/11 in terms of, this kind of militant, war. I mean, I grew up during the Cold War, and
Mm,
I had to sign papers when I took a job at the University of Georgia that I wasn't a communist, and
mm.
and the civil rights movement and racism in the South and all that. I felt like it was just a continuation. It's gone deeper into kind of some of the dark and ugly parts of America. I honestly would say that more transformative for American culture and probably culture across the world is social media and smartphones.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that has fundamentally changed the way that we interact with each other when we're not home, when we are home, but in public spaces. As a photographer trying to photograph, you can't hardly take pictures of people without other people, being on their phones, and of course everybody is, wanting to see it right away, and it's just, yeah.
I think a little bit with the September the 11th is I wonder whether or not the events of September the 11th trickled down to the people on Greyhound. I mean, obviously they knew about it and they experienced it, but did it impact them? Because society is very stratified, and what affects one section of society doesn't necessarily affect all sections of society.
Well,
So
it
that,
sort of it's I know I got on a Greyhound after September 11th. I mean, I haven't
mhm.
ridden very much since, but I know not long after I came back, for whatever reason, I got on a bus, and there were metal detectors and a whole kind of,
That's the other aspect to it.
and
Yeah.
that's probably gone away now, but there was high security, like even sort of hanging out in the bus station if you didn't have a ticket or you weren't going somewhere, it was kind of like that was eliminated. And so, that definitely changed. There was a heightened insecurity or paranoia or, security defensiveness about what are you doing, and that also transcended into photography, that I think that people were more suspicious about a photographer. I I remember I went up to New York and visited my aunt, and we walked across the George Washington Bridge, and there were signs on the George Washington Bridge. We walked from, I mean, and this is kind of a testament to like who I am and how my aunt was too. It's like, a lot of people would be like, why are you doing that? Why won't you drive? I mean, that's a long walk. But it was like, my aunt
Mm.
was like, this will be fun. We'll take the subway up to 180 or 90, whatever it is, and then walk across the bridge and catch a bus on the other side to Fort Lee and visit our friend. And there were signs on the bridge that said it's illegal to photograph the bridge.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and that whole thing kind of came about after 9/11. This kind of like everywhere you go, people are like, "What are you photographing? And why are you photographing it?" And people thinking you must be some kind of spy or casing it out to figure out where to plant the bomb or something like that.
I was going through immigration at that time. I came to America in '99, went back to Australia for a year, and then I came back after September 11th, and
It was crazy.
it was different. I was videoing going through the airport and got pinged and stopped, and it was a different atmosphere
It
for sure.
was, but I think to a large extent that's kind of, you know, I don't want to say it's returned back to the way it was before, but people aren't so paranoid about terrorists anymore.
No,
And,
but, but
and there's not that. I mean, that was the end of going to the gate to meet people at the airport and that kind of thing. But and that began the taking off your shoes and stuff like that. But and some of that still continues. But most of the kind of paranoia about people thinking as a photographer or some stranger wandering around that you're up to something nefarious, that's kind of gone away now.
because you got a chance to look into these people's lives, you got a chance to speak to them. You made a diary, you took their photographs, you got to know them, you got to know that side of America. Could you do that today? I mean, obviously, people were more guarded post September the 11th, but I think the point about social media is more apt is that everybody has a phone as a shield. Do you think you could tell that story today?
I I mean, I don't want to be too arrogant or whatever, but I actually I think I could.
You personally could, but
No, no, no.
but it
I
would have
don't
been
mean no,
harder.
no. I think it would be harder, but I mean, again, like I just spent, last week I went out for 2 days and one night to the coast, and I actually took a number of portraits, and I
Mm,
met a stranger. I mean, I was actually out on the pier, and that was not like a pier that was like a fancy kind of pier that tourists go to. It was just like a parking lot, and I was watching the sunset and taking some pictures, and somebody walked up behind me, a young woman, and she was traveling around with her dog, and it was the same exact experience. She was like, I was like, "Hey," and she's like, "Hey," and I'm thinking like, I was actually kind of thinking like, maybe I shouldn't say hey to this person because they're a young woman, and maybe
mm.
they're going to get creeped out. Like there's this older guy who's like, maybe they were hoping they could just come out here and watch the sunset, and everybody wants to be in their own little private, whatever. And next thing I know, I was like, you want to go get some pizza together, and we hung out, and it was totally cool. And I think there's still that opportunity. I think people are even hungrier for it now. Honestly, they're hungrier for connection. The problem is that there's like a lot of, I want to call it like dysfunction or sickness or whatever, that a lot of people are forgetting what it's like to kind of be open to meeting people or talking to strangers and stuff like that. But I think there's also a hunger for it.
Mm,
I think that people want to, in that sense, that gives me the opportunity to like do the same thing, like meet people,
mm.
take their picture, and of course I can put it up on Instagram or wherever right away, and they can see it, and they might like that. I find that happens a lot now that I take pictures and I give people my card, I give them my
Mm.
Instagram feed. Uh, I think I should point out one other thing. I don't have a smartphone. I still use a flip phone.
It's not a bad thing, so what are the reasons for that?
I don't wanna have the internet in my pocket. I wanna
Yeah,
be
it's
open in the world when I'm out in the world, and I know myself, I'm on my computer a lot when I'm home,
mm,
so I remain open is the point, and so if I remain open, then there are other people out there that are still open. But yeah, it would be harder because there are going to be a lot of pictures with people wearing phones. I mean, using their phones. I was thinking of masks too. There's still going to be
mm.
people wearing masks, and I didn't really want to go out like during the depths of the pandemic when everybody was wearing masks. I had no interest in photographing people wearing masks.
Obviously, your job as a photojournalist or somebody who actually goes out of their way to capture things, and that's your career, that's one thing. But I definitely think for your layman who's going to take a journey like this and who wants interpersonal experiences and wants to enjoy engaging with people, it's not what it was. It is it's much easier for somebody to talk to somebody they know on their phone than it is to talk to somebody in person.
Yeah, I agree, and I guess to kind of change my answer to your question, I mean, I haven't ridden the Greyhound in a long time, and I don't think that the Greyhound would be the ticket to do it anymore.
Yeah.
I don't think that, as that Vice article mentioned, I mean, if they got Wi-Fi on the bus, and it's the same thing with flying now. I mean, it used to be kind of fun to be on an airplane and you can meet people and talk to people.
I could tell you everybody I've spoken to from 1990 till about 2000, the people that I met. I couldn't tell you anybody I'd met since then.
Right, and the dread that you had that somebody's gonna sit down next to you and talk your ear off is actually also the promise of opportunity to, like, discover something in somebody. So, yeah,
But
so it would be harder, but I would find a way to, like, find the opportunities, the places where people are hanging out and are not broadcasting something on their phone or
mm,
social media while they're out. I'd find the places where people are still doing things with their body and in space, go to a beach where people are surfing or a skate park, and that kind of thing. There's still places you can go to find people doing real world things that don't involve their smartphones and the internet. So,
well, I hope so. I was at Yosemite National Park about in 2013, and I hadn't been in a youth hostel for years, and I was expecting this sharing of ideas, and it was looking at people looking at screens. So
that and there, but then you would go out onto a trail for 3 days and camp out, and then there's no phone signal, and then
let's
you
hope so. Let's hope it never gets to the point where people are doing it on the trails. That would be horrendous. So what are you doing now? You're in Portland. You've finally settled down. You've scratched that itch. That's
yeah.
all done. You don't need to go off and vagabond anymore.
No, I'm teaching. I mean, I still like to go off on trips for a week or two, but I don't know that I really want to go for many months like that, and because I'm not searching for that. But I teach photography, and with my most recent project that I did photographically was in my own neighborhood, and I was shooting Polaroid film, and so everybody that I photographed, it was this very unique kind of 4 by 5 large format film that gives you a print and a negative, and so
Mm,
everybody that I photographed, I would give a picture to immediately of them, the picture that I shot, and
mhm,
and then I know those people, and I feel very plugged into the community. A lot of people that I photographed have become friends or acquaintances that I know now, neighbors and that sort of thing, and so, yeah, I'm building community and staying connected. I'm inspiring or teaching or helping other people find their own path in photography, and that's a lot more rewarding than being a photojournalist because I actually develop relationships with people that are long term, and I use like my home here in Portland as kind of a base to go out on these like short little adventures of vagabonding or being the rabbit or whatever, go wandering around.
quickly, rabbit. Do you
Yeah,
want to define it? Because obviously you mentioned the book Rabbit, Rabbit, Rabbit. So
yeah.
why rabbit?
Well, I was driving. A friend of mine asked me. A friend moved from Atlanta to Portland before me back in the '90s, and they asked me if I could then bring their car out, their truck, their pickup truck. And I drove from Atlanta to Portland, and somewhere in the middle, I think it was Nebraska or something like that. I stopped in a rest stop, Oklahoma maybe, and there were these kind of hippie young women sitting on a blanket burning incense, and And I kind of walked past them to the bathroom, and they smiled, and I said, "Hey," and they said, "Hey," and they said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm driving to Oregon," and they said, "Oh, that's funny. We just left Oregon. We're going to North Carolina." And I'm like, "I just left Georgia," and they're like, "Well, why don't you, when you come back from the bathroom, if you have some time, why don't you come and hang out with us for a little while?" And I sat down on the blanket with them, and they were like looking at some book, and it was like an Indian Native American folklore book about something or another, and they asked me what my totem was, and I'm like, "I don't know what you're talking about." And they said, "Well, some according to some Native American folklore, there's animal spirits that come to you and guide you, and if you tell us what your animal spirit is, then we can tell you what it means." And I'm like, "Oh, that would be a rabbit." And they're like, "Oh," and I'm like, they said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, there were many times that I was feeling like distressed about something in my life. My response was always to go take a long walk. And invariably, at the most intense kind of moments of distress or whatever it was, depression, this rabbit, and it always seemed to be the exact same rabbit, this old gray rabbit, would just be sitting there, and I'd walk right up to it and it wouldn't move. And it would just like, I would talk to it. And anyway, so they looked up rabbit, and rabbit as a totem or a spirit animal signifies that when you're scared or feeling under pressure, you run away. And also, there's other stories about being gregarious and looking for love. And rabbits are like, very fertile. And not that I've been very fertile, but that idea that like you're looking for love and connection, but you also travel alone, and you're run away rather than fight when you're
Mm,
confronted. And it just seemed like a great I had already been doing that for a number of years, those kind of photographic journeys. And so it just
mm,
seemed like a great umbrella catchphrase for what my work was about, with a metaphor, not really anything literal, but that idea of the rabbit hopping along the trail, kind of, and rabbits are also very clever, and they can hide, and they move quickly, and all those kind of things,
Well, look, I really enjoyed looking through your photographs. I think I enjoyed it as much for nostalgia because I had a history with Greyhound as well, and it brought back a lot of my memories. I've really enjoyed getting the opportunity to talk to you, Bobby. It's
Oh, thank you.
it's tremendous, and I do love your work. And if anybody wants to contact you, they can go to your website,
Yeah,
and I'll put that in the links. You can still buy copies of your One Summer Across America, right?
yeah, I got plenty of copies. Yeah.
But you can't get the Rabbit book. The Rabbit book's out of print.
It's sold out, but yeah, if you're really interested, just send me a message via my website. I mean, I've held back 11 copies. I printed only 100, but I'm trying to like save those for the special last, whatever reasons that I distribute them. So, but yeah, yeah, just talk to me.
So what are you going to do next?
Good question.
I saw that you're interested in Polaroid film, and obviously you talked about that, and you still shoot in film, not digital, right?
I do both, but mostly film.
And even a little delving into Super 8. I saw you had some videos up of 90s journeys into Super 8.
Yeah, I shot a lot of Super 8 in the 90s. I haven't shot Super 8 in a long time, but yeah, I mean, it's not very exciting, I guess I would say. I'm interested in painting and photography and playing guitar, and camping, and enjoying life, and I kind of feel like I've kind of reached a maturity that it took a little too long to get here, but you know, I have my dog, she's old, and I have a house, and I have a community, and yeah, everything seems like pretty nice. I got a lot of good friends, and I have several different homes. I go to Mexico every year for a couple weeks and hang out on the beach in Oaxaca, and I go to New York, and I have friends there, and Atlanta, and I don't need to go run away anymore. So I'm pretty good, and teaching. I'm volunteering at a place teaching photography with youth that are homeless in Portland, and that's really inspiring. And I teach at a community college, and that's really inspiring. And then people show back up that have done something photographically, and they want to share with me what they've accomplished, and that's more rewarding than getting my picture on the front page of the New York Times. So
I created this podcast with the idea of talking to people and why they get away. And I think one of the things that I've come through talking to you and even other people is that how much people think about it as escape and you disappear, but it's as much about meeting people and talking to people and sharing experiences as that it is just escaping. And I really like that about your book. I loved the personalities that were in it.
Thank you.
And thank you. I've taken up far too much more of your time. If anybody wants to contact Bobby, you can go to the website that'll be in the show notes. And obviously, I do encourage you to look through his work. It's very, very interesting. It's particularly interesting for those of us that can remember that time. And certainly, if there's anybody out there who has any Greyhound stories, please share them with me. And once again, thank you very much, Bobby Abramson.
Thank you.
I dropped the ham, right?
You did. You dropped it. You got it right.
Okay. And it's funny because if I was in England, I would say Birmingham. I wouldn't say Birmingham. I should just come to it naturally. Thank you, Bobby. I appreciate it. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I certainly did. Now, try and write my feelings down as I listen back and edit. Greyhound is primarily a cheap form of transport. At least it was. I just priced a ticket from Auburn, Alabama to Columbia, Missouri, and the cheapest ticket was $160. And that was for a 30-hour bus ride. And that gives the whole unlimited Ameripass a romantic edge. I read that the Ameripass was a response to European travellers who were used to the hop-on, hop-off InteRail passes. Back when Greyhound were offering the unlimited travel pass, so was Amtrak. In fact, they had their own, and that was the one that I was interested in when I came here as an exchange student. But Greyhound no longer offers a pass. Instead, it's become something of a legend, and the Amtrak one is severely truncated from the way it was in the early 2000s. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't all-you-can-travel passes available. Frontier Airlines offers an unlimited travel pass. In fact, I bought one, although I'm actually yet to use it. Now, to me, there is something romantic and easy about hop-on, hop-off. I am quite willing to sacrifice my personal space for the opportunity and the ease of just getting on and off transport, and also getting to know others of a similar mindset, if that's possible anymore. I mean, with the prevalence of Wi-Fi and social media, everybody seems to be in their own little bubble. Although I can say that the Frontier Pass has driven those conversations online. People communicate in Facebook groups and then meet in real life later. Maybe, I don't know, I hope so. As I said throughout the show, links to Bobby's website are in the show notes, and his One Summer Across America book is still available, and it's definitely worth a look. I also encourage you to read the original Vice article, and the main picture seems to be unique to that article and not in Bobby's book, which suggests that maybe there are probably hundreds of pictures that Bobby never actually released. I've also included a link to the 1989 documentary Ridin the Dog by the BBC, and tangentially, a link to the documentary 40 Years on Track about InteRail culture and lifestyle. Finally, there is a link to my YouTube channel, the Old Home Movie Vlog. I've included this more for those interested in human photography. In addition to my Wanderlust, I also collect orphaned old home movies. I have a couple of 8mm Kodachrome compilations, the 1964 World's Fair, and a trip to Hawaii in the 1970s. I've come across some amazing train and Greyhound film throughout the years of collecting, and who knows, maybe one day I'll get that digitized and posted as well. Now, the next episode is Steve Roberts talking about his multi-year recumbent bicycle adventure across the States. It's also a two-parter. It's also incredibly long. And after that, who knows? Send me ideas if you've got them, and Greyhound stories too, because I always love to hear those. I would like to end with one big thank you to Bobby for taking the time out to talk about his travels with me. That was awesome, and I very, very much enjoyed it. And special thanks, of course, to Tom Jode and Kelly Weiss for providing music for the show. And thank you to you all for listening to Skippycast.